Hey riders, welcome to another video in our adventure motorcycle review series. I'm Eric Lange with Ride Adventures, and I finally have here beside me Harley-Davidson's new Pan America. They're offering for the adventure touring category. Excited to get this thing out. I'm going to take you along for a ride on the pavement this morning and later on the dirt and show you my first impressions of this machine. So let's get on the road. Okay, I should mention right away that we did have some sound issues with my helmet microphone, so we're going to do this from the studio after the fact and give you my thoughts, and I think in a way be able to help you decide whether this is a bike that you want to buy. Excitement was there as soon as we first saw photos of the Harley Pan America back in 2018. I mean, this is my hometown pride. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I was super excited to see that they were entering the adventure bike market, and we've seen Harley maybe not always be on the cutting edge with things over the years. Maybe it was a little strange when for the 100th anniversary party back in 2003 and the final night, the big party, 100,000 people on the lakefront, that Elton John was chosen to take the stage. Hey, love Elton, love his music, but there's some funny little things that have happened over the history of the company, and we just had to hope from the beginning that they got it right here with the adventure bike introduction. So first thing I did in the parking lot was just kind of check out the turning radius here, with the 62.2-inch wheelbase and a 25-degree rake. It turns pretty well, not unlike other big 500-plus pound adventure bikes in this category. Does its turns, and that's important to be able to do. We've got a whole video dedicated to that, by the way, ways to turn around your bike. So it's nice to be able to move with some agility through a parking lot or whatever trail situation you might end up on. But pulling away here, it's pretty easy to talk about right away the Revolution Max V-twin that Harley's put together for this bike. Right away you'll notice that power that is there. 150 horsepower, 94 foot-pounds of torque, redlining at 9,000 revs. Right away you'll feel, including down low, that grunt is down there, down low in this 60-degree V-twin. An engine that normally I don't think of as having a low-end power, a real grunt down there. They made it possible with a couple of interesting features. So first, those being the variable valve timing, which is a patent Harley has filed for, having a module between the crankshaft and cam assembly to allow, again, that variable valve to work in there and allow you not only low-end grunt, but high revving power, and it just works out to be power that you feel throughout the RPM range on this engine. So nice job there, Harley. The other reason they got 150 horsepower out of a 1252 cc engine is, if you'll notice, this is a 13-to-1 compression ratio, which is pretty hot if you compare it to other motorcycles, and especially in maybe the adventure bike category. So that 13-to-1 pumping up tight there at the top of the combustion chamber is going to give you that power, but you might want to think too about the longevity of this engine. Is it going to get people over 60, 80, or over 100,000 miles of use before needing a major overhaul? Having parts that tight and being compressed so hot and so tight like that, it might not be a real long-running engine like some of the old BMW Boxers that have 300,000 and 400,000 miles on them still on all original parts. And so there's that to think about. And then also, if it is going to be a world traveler bike, is the low octane that you could come across in some situations, is that going to be an issue? I didn't get a chance to test any real low octane. We do those trips around the world where we're in tiny little villages and remote places, in Bolivia or wherever we happen to be, and maybe 78 octane out of the bottle of somebody's back door at their house is the only thing available. And did Harley put in here an ignition system with the ability to advance and retard timing such that you're not going to have dieseling issues from octane imbalances, I guess, with such a high compression engine. So, because that can, of course, add to a lack of longevity for the life of the motor. Hope they got it right in those regards, and we'll have to test that, and we'll have follow-up reviews as we start to use these bikes around the world, hopefully. With hydraulic valves, no valve adjustments needed. Not like some other bikes where every 8 to 15,000 miles you have to check your valve. So hydraulics should keep this thing relatively low maintenance. Kind of a quiet note coming out of it. Maybe that's perfect too, because what do we do with adventure travel, introducing ourselves to foreign lands, small villages, tiny places where you don't need to go crackling through with a full V-twin sound. Maybe it's a good thing that they've kept this exhaust note kind of simple and quiet. Of course, aftermarket options will pump that sound up a little bit for you, but it sounds good and I like it. And then, so back to the power that they put in this thing, in every way that I'm using the engine so far, from low end coming out of the parking lot to, I accidentally started back in second gear and didn't really even notice it has enough low end grunt to pull me out of the parking lot without any major clutch work or whatever. And yeah, the power stays steady then all the way on up through the range to 9,000, with maybe a small bump in the power coming in the mid 6,000. So pretty smooth though, no lurching, nothing to really worry about braking traction once you're hanging on that throttle. So interesting that Harley did add a rev limiter when you're in neutral. They limited it to 4,000 in revs, and we've all joked over the years about how does a Harley rider know his engine is running unless he can rev it a bunch of times in the parking lot or whatever. That joke aside, at least you're only doing it up to 4,000. Probably best to take care of the engine and, again, not make unnecessary noise out there in the world. Yeah, so throughout the day, definitely had the chance to check out this great engine that Harley put together. From lugging it in fifth gear, 2,000 RPMs way down low, all the way up to winding it out at the top. Again, a great performing engine that I think deserves all the notoriety it's gotten so far out there in the press. So nice job, Harley, with that. On to the suspension topic. Well, an interesting feature that they added or made available on the special version here would be this adaptive ride height. It's, I believe, about $1,000 upgrade option if you want it available on that bike. And, well, it's for those who maybe reach a little bit more than they want to reach the ground in the first place. It's ideal for those situations if you're not able to go perfectly flat foot and want to be able to, pulling up to a stoplight or stop sign and having the bike automatically lower itself an inch or two to make it easier for you to stabilize yourself on the ground. That's a nice feature. It adds up to the inner leg curve, not having to sort of crease your leg over the edge of the seat, day in and day out, all day long or whatever. It's nice to have that more comfortable lower position when you're stopped. And then as you're riding away, you don't really feel it, but it returns itself to the setting that you had for the ride height previously. So a feature, again, taller riders with longer legs probably don't need that so much, but those who appreciate it certainly will. Hopefully it's a reliable system. There is the cost factor, there is the fact that it must add some weight somewhere to the bike, and also that it's it's one more thing to potentially fail. But again, hopefully Harley's put together a good system that won't be a hindrance to you in any way, and might be a real nice advantage to enjoy for comfort reasons. And then as the entire semi-active front and rear suspension system works, this is based on Showa's balance-free system. And what they're talking about there is the piston itself in the suspension components is not generating the dampening force. Instead, it's actually happening through the exterior, the outside cylinder, basically, where all the pressurization is taking place. And long story short, that should mean to a pretty high-tech, advanced system of components here, making for a great suspension option. As I'm riding, I'm able to switch from sport mode, which is a very tight, high compression, high rebound compression, tight features like that for when you're diving into turns and the twisties. Maybe you don't want the bike rocking back and forth so much, but you want it to stabilize out and be sporty and aggressive. Well, perfect for that sport setting when the engine is at full power anyway. And then as I was riding along, I was able to toggle it over to road mode, and you can do that while you're riding. By the way, you can switch these different riding modes, and then road I believe kept the same engine basic settings and power, but then mellowed out the suspension a little bit, softened the compression and rebound, and made it a lot more comfortable to ride. Just feeling little bumps and subtleties in the ground really sort of butters it over when you soften up the suspension. And then variations like that are available in the off-road modes as well, so you can go from a soft to a more firm off-road suspension setting, again based on your situation. Those are things that are all really nice to have. I mean, this definitely puts the bike into what I would call sort of the adventure luxury class, where you have that ability to just touch a couple buttons and be able to make such adjustments. Other bikes, we either have to get out tools or get down on the ground or whatever to do those things, and for that reason a lot of riders don't make those adjustments. Nice to have them all there. hopefully with a reliable system at your fingertips, because it sure is a comfort factor, especially for long trips. I'm not entirely sure why they call this semi-active suspension. It's in a roundabout way. It's a connection that they made between the software connecting the swing arm, the rear wheel, throttle position, lean angle, and all these things to adjust and become optimal while you're riding. Also, the auto height leveling, so it's going to adjust the geometry and according to the weight of that you have on yourself or your luggage or whatever. It's doing all these things largely for you, and it would be an awful lot to try and explain more. Sort of the thing you have to experience yourself, but you've got a lot of electronics options here, all atop basically about 7.5 inches of front and rear suspension travel, which takes me back to one of the first things I think about when I want an adventure bike. I want ample suspension travel and ground clearance to really go check out whatever dirt road I happen to go by. It's that daily ride home from work, let's just say, where you've always wondered where that dirt road goes. Well, with an adventure bike and ample suspension travel and ground clearance, you can go find it out. And Harley's doing pretty good here with 7.5 inches available to you. Think about it that way too. If it was any more suspension travel, like some of the Africa Twins and the Yamaha Tenere 700, these bikes have more suspension travel for sure, but then it makes it taller too. So it's not something that's always available for some riders to be able to stand over. The Harley does come with the option to lower the seat height. You can go up and down by roughly an inch in 2 seat positions, but if you're at all struggling to reach the ground on these big adventure bikes, looking for that bike that has more suspension travel might mean it's too tall of a seat height for you to comfortably stand over and place your feet on the ground comfortably when you're in an off-road situations in particular. You sometimes stop on the trail and your foot happens to be down in a rut or whatever, and well, that's all considered. Maybe you only want a bike with this much height to it overall. As alluded to, they gave us a great dashboard here with this TFT display. It would be an awful lot, again, to try and go in and explain to you all the different menu options. We don't want to do that in a simple video like this. One interesting feature I did note that was particularly relevant when riding this thing in the dirt is I didn't find an option to turn the traction control off completely. And that's something I've talked about in other videos. Ultimately, not my preference. I do not want or need a computer to tell me how much slip my rear wheel is getting. I want to be able to feel that through the throttle, through the engine, or maybe I just didn't find it, but you'll see actually as we go on here, I've got some footage where that inability to turn off traction control might have contributed to my testing the crash bars on this bike as they wrap themselves around the chassis, which is another thing to talk about. So I mentioned before, 25-degree rake as a point of reference. Honda Africa Twin currently is at 27 degrees of rake, so having this thing slightly more upright and yet slightly longer than an Africa Twin just maybe give you a feel on how it's going to handle it. It feels like a slightly long bike, and well, it still turns with agility though with such an upright rake angle like that. 62.2 inch wheelbase, kind of standard for that 500 plus pound heavyweight adventure bike category. This one coming in at 559 pounds, fully fueled, wet, ready to go. The braking system I did check out, works very nicely. I made sure there were no cars behind me and slammed on those brakes. The 4-piston radially mounted monoblock Brembo calipers clamp down on those twin front 320 millimeter discs. It's got a single 280 millimeter disc in the rear. Yeah, and it stopped beautifully. It was interesting to see that the clutch and front brake lever they seem to be made of a different material. We haven't confirmed that yet, but trying to figure out why they gave us a slightly different feel in each lever as opposed to symmetry between each. Another thing we noticed too is that the rear master cylinder is kind of exposed out there in the open, and it'd be interesting to see if Harley can move that a little bit more under the frame for future renditions of this bike, so as to not have that rear master cylinder exposed so much when you do tip over. The transmission, I couldn't say anything bad about it, that's for sure. As indicated on the dashboard, there were 6 gears available. Not sure if you can see that on the helmet cam, but yeah, simple 1 down, 5 up. It does not clunk down as badly as other Harleys I've felt. Going from neutral into first, for example, you get a real heavy clunk on some bikes and some transmissions. This one's pretty smooth. And then, the only time I did have a few different misshifts, I fully admit they were my own fault. I'm getting used to a new feeling on a new bike, and talking while I'm riding, and just, I've had a few misshifts, but none felt like they were the fault of the transmission design themselves. I even accidentally started out, like I said, pulling out of the parking lot there in second gear the first time pulling away with that powerful low-end engine. With just a tiny little bit of clutch, I was able to get through in second gear and not kill the engine. The transmission does not have that auto upshift, that sort of auto shift blipping feature where it meshes the engine revolutions with with the speed that everything else is turning. But I don't think of this as a bike that I'm trying to drive or ride that aggressively anyway, so no auto upshift isn't a real big feature. As the day goes on, though, and as I mentioned earlier, we transitioned more into the dirt sections of the area that we're in, Central Oregon here, and so that was where I started to miss having a 21-inch front and 18-inch rear. Like I'm most often these days riding the Honda Africa Twin, just for a bunch of reasons I've mentioned in other videos, and that comes with a 21-inch front wheel and 18-inch rear. The Harley here coming with a 19 front and 17 rear, which was an advantage, of course, on the pavement. Closer to 17 that you are, the more it's going to bite and grip down into that pavement and help you through those turns and really feel appropriate for the pavement. And again, on pavement, you're not dealing with imperfections and rocks and ruts and things like that like you are in off-road. So having the smaller wheels to roll over pavement surfaces doesn't, really detract from the comfort and the ride feeling that you're getting up through the ground. But again, when you take this thing into the dirt, then that's when I wish I had that bigger front 21-inch wheel to roll over the rocks and the ruts, and to sort of add essentially to the overall height and ground clearance of the bike, I guess you could say, and just be able, the 21-inch walking a little bit better over ruts and situations, being less of a risk for me than the 19-inch. But the bike certainly still gets around, though, in the dirt. That one feature I noted before, not being able to turn off the traction control, at least not that I was able to find. Talked about that in other videos, where I just don't want a system to monitor for me how much I'm allowing my rear wheel to slip. I want to be able to do that entirely on my own, with my right hand, with my left, with my body weight and my feet, and where I'm putting pressure into the ground and gaining traction on my own. I don't want a system that is going to limit wheel slippage at all for me. And as we would go on, actually, in a bit here, I can show you some footage how a hill climb that I did, one that I had done dozens of times before, it sort of got me and surprised me when I wasn't able to move the rear end like I wanted to, because of that traction control remaining somewhat in effect even in sport mode, and sort of bogged me down. I got stuck on the hill and then started backing down, and I made a mistake, something I've talked about in other videos, where when you're turning a bike around on a hill like this, don't take your downhill foot off that foot peg. Leave it on there so as to not give yourself the sensation that you're going to be able to reach the ground. Because while I was doing this sort of turnaround, the rear end slipped off a rocker, just moved a little bit, and all of a sudden I was heavy going downhill and dropped the bike, which gave me a chance to test these crash bars that come included in the Pan America special model. They did a pretty good job holding up against this little tip over that I had. The tank was not damaged. The front brake lever did break off at the detent point there, so I didn't lose the entire lever, but just the tip of it. Good move there. But the exhaust got scratched up and a little bit on the side of the engine. A couple of painful points, but for the most part, the crash protection did do pretty well in this simple tip over. And all that crash protection is wrapped around a chassis that uses the engine as a stressed member. So stressed member chassis, the engine is part of the frame, and you could say that is not a great thing for hard pounding. You could say that stressed member chassis are not as durable as other trellis type chassis. Have yet to really prove that here, but in general, as I go on to wrap this up, I think you'll see that this is not really an adventure bike that's meant to be pounded as hard as some others are anyway. It's definitely more of a luxury machine and meant for simple gravel and not the most rugged stuff out there. But at 559 pounds wet weight, ready to ride, again, that's part of what I'm talking about, a luxury machine here in the heavyweight category, so to speak. Something that you don't want to be pounding too much anyway, by not having the 21 18-inch wheel set combination, and by not having as much ground clearance and suspension travel as some other bikes do in this category, I think you're just a little bit limited in the types of riding that you would want to do with it. Simple flat gravel roads, no problem. Even more aggressive than that, sure. But again, once you start to really need more suspension and travel and ground clearance than this offers, you might want to be on a different bike. As far as how it handles on the pavement, of course, this is as great a touring bike as any I've ridden. I mean, of course, there are more pavement-specific bikes out there, but this thing is really in the middle of all motorcycles that you might want to ride on pavement or off-road. It's an adventure bike, and it fits into that category because of all these features. A couple other notable features about the bike would be the adjustable windshield. Very nice feature to have, I believe, 4 different positions just to be able to reach down and move that up and down. I think I mentioned before the adjustable seat with 2 positions available. This one came with the center stand, a multi-position rear brake pedal, brush and crash guards like we talked about, aluminum skid plate. Not a real great skid plate situation. Again, a bike that you're not going to want to pound real hard anyway. And the regulator rectifier is kind of exposed up there in an interesting position right behind the front wheel. It's kind of a tough spot on a bike to have electronics so sensitive to things that might be coming off the ground. In certain municipalities around the world, you have salt being applied for winter months, and you have for snowmelt reasons, and do you want that kicking up into your electronics like that? Well, hopefully it works out. The adaptive headlights, changing and moving their position while you ride, so as to help you around turns and things like that. Heated grips came standard. A steering damper is helping in the off-road riding situation. It helps on pavement of course as well. Nice to have steering dampening in there. A tire pressure monitoring system also came on this bike. So you've got, again, a really luxury bike that well, I think I can wrap this up and summarize it for you in a way that's going to help you decide if this is the right adventure bike or any bike for you.
First of all, saying thanks to Wild Horse Harley-Davidson and Kawasaki of here in Bend, Oregon. Thanks for making the bike available to us, and I'm ultimately really impressed with the Harley-Davidson Pan America. From those initial photos I saw and some of the specs I was reading, I was not impressed with the bike, but they have really produced a great machine here for the right person that wants to do the right kind of riding for this bike. And what I mean is, you're going to love things like that powerful engine. You're going to love a lot of the systems and the way that it handles on the pavement for sure. And if you're the kind of rider that wants to do mostly pavement, but also include some gravel and some simple, more flat dirt roads and such on your adventure bike, then this is probably a great option for you. But again, if you're wanting to do rugged off-road rocks and ruts and big stuff that you gotta get more ground clearance and suspension travel for, of course, this might not be the bike for you. A bike in this heavyweight category, are you going to want to be out there in the ruggedness of the world, traveling on your own and have to pick up the bike like I did at 500 plus pounds? Or would you rather be in that middleweight category like some of the bikes that are coming out these days? And that's one of the next things I look forward to the most from my hometown Harley-Davidson, that they will answer this bike or follow it with more of a middleweight option for those riders who don't want something this heavy. But all in all, a fun bike. I really hope you enjoy it if you get one, and let us know in the comments if you have any questions, and we'll do our best to help you out. And thanks for watching, everyone. Ride on. We'll see you out there.
Eric,
What?
you farted.
No, that wasn't me. Apparently the seat works pretty well with farts.